In today's video, we're going to be talking about some of my personal favorite dividend growth stocks for the long term. And I know you guys like your timestamps, so I left them for you down below. All I ask is that you please hit the like button if you enjoy the video, as it really helps the channel survive and grow. But with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. What's up everyone, my name is Ale. Welcome back to my world of stocks. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to take a closer look at like my 3 favorite dividend growth stocks, and we'll spend a little more time on those, and then I'm going to do a bonus of 5 extra stocks in like a very quick rapid fire at the end of the video. So it'll be 8 stocks in total, which is kind of a lot. But the reason I'm doing that is because the first 3 stocks on the list have pretty low dividend yields, especially the first stock. It has very low yield. They do have a lot of growth potential, so that's kind of the trade-off. But because I know that a lot of you actually like higher yield dividends, I purposely chose the bonus 5 stocks as ones that have higher yields. They may not have as much growth potential, but I also chose some that have long track records of growing their dividends every year for a long period of time. So they already have a high yield, and it's very unlikely that that dividend will ever get cut. So you'll be able to collect those dividends into the future. And one last thing I want to mention, obviously the stock market is trading near record highs. And that just, it just so happens that a lot of my favorite stocks are also trading near record highs. So I'm sorry, I can't really do anything about that. Just know that I personally do most of my buying when stocks are going down. So whenever there's little dips or even like a healthy correction, that's when I do the majority of my buying. I do still buy stocks even at these higher levels, but I do it much slower in very small amounts. So I kind of slow down my buying, and then I reaccelerate my buying when there's any dips or corrections or things like that. Anyway, these are still stocks that I really believe in for the long term, and some of them I actually own, and some of them I am looking to buy very soon, and I'll let you know as we go through the list. But the theme of the video will be very dominant companies, because I figure if you're going to be paying a high price tag, you might as well get a lot of quality back. So I purposely chose stocks that are market leaders, especially the first 3 stocks on the list. And starting with stock number 1, this is the very clear and very dominant leader in the kind of digital payments processing market, and that is of course Visa, ticker symbol V, which also happens to be one of my favorite fintech stocks, probably my favorite kind of fintech type of stock out in the market as well. Now, I do not currently own Visa stock myself, but I probably will be buying it very soon at some point in 2020 on any kind of little dip, because I do really like this company. Now, Visa has the lowest yield of all the stocks on the list, so I promise it'll get better throughout the video, but they currently yield only around 0.64%, which is probably too low for any dividend investors to take it seriously. But the thing that I do like about it is that their payout ratio is less than 20%, while their 5-year growth rate is over 20%. So it's a very high growth dividend that has all the room that they need to keep it growing at some very high rates into the future. And that'll likely be the case, as they've now grown it for over a decade in a row. Now, as far as their business goes, Visa has grown their revenue by double-digit rates in all 3 recent years, and are expected to continue doing so in 2020 and 2021 as well, with EPS growth of over 15% on average over the next 5 years. And all of this growth is despite them already commanding more credit card market share than any other company in the world, with over 50% market share, and that climbs all the way up to over 70% when looking at debit card volume, which is essentially a duopoly with MasterCard. But just to put a dollar amount on all of this kind of market dominance, Visa's total payment volume in 2018 was nearly $2 trillion. The next closest competitor was MasterCard at just about 800 million. That's pretty crazy. Yet when looking into the future, there's plenty of opportunities for them to keep growing even more, especially outside the United States, where only around half of Visa's volume lies versus MasterCard at over 70%. On one hand, that means that MasterCard is doing a great job of tapping into that international growth already, already, but on the other hand, it also means that Visa has a massive opportunity to focus more heavily on the international markets, and because they're already so large just kind of in general, they actually still command more international market share than MasterCard, despite, again, only having around half of their business relying on it. In other words, Visa is already dominating, yet they could still grow their international business even more. Either way though, both companies are in a great situation. I actually really like MasterCard as well, but this is because the overall market will only get bigger with the rise of online shopping and digital payments and transfers in general. This is something that Visa is not only benefiting from through the use of their credit and debit cards, but also with Visa Direct. See, nearly 50% of all cards in circulation are Visas, having just topped 3.4 billion cards last year, while Visa Direct, which is their kind of real-time domestic and cross-border digital payments and transfer network, now operates in over 170 different countries and saw transaction growth of over 100% this past year. So it's clearly on fire. Now, all of this success has led to a stock that rarely ever dips and currently sits near record highs after soaring by over 185% in the past 5 years. And that's why I've hesitated to buy the stock myself, as I just never seem to be able to find an attractive entry point. But considering that their forward P ratio is not only cheaper than MasterCard, but also over 20% cheaper than the sector median as well, despite these record highs, I think it won't be very long before I start buying into this stock. I'm hoping the next overall kind of market dip or correction drags Visa down a little, and if it does, I'm going to be buying very heavily into Visa stock, and I'm going to try to build them into a really big core position in my portfolio because I do really like them. But to be honest, it's very surprising to me that the very clear market leader actually trades for a cheaper price than the sector. That is like mind-boggling to me. I really feel like Visa deserves to trade for a significant premium. So I'm not gonna ask for a big dip on this one. Just give me like a little dip here and there. I'll average my way into Visa, and if they ever drop more significantly, I'll just buy heavier and lower my cost basis and really turn this into a big position in my portfolio. I really think I'll be doing that throughout 2020 because it's definitely a company I really believe in for the future. Okay, and that brings us to stock number 2, and that's going to be one of the market leaders in the banking sector, which I'm not really familiar with banking stocks myself, but I actually own this stock. It's the only banking stock that I've ever purchased in my entire life, and it's one that I currently hold, and it's because they are such a well-run bank, and they also have a very attractive dividend as well. And that company is, of course, JP Morgan Chase. The ticker symbol is JPM. I'm sure you heard of them. They're one of the biggest banks in the world. Now, when taking a look at that dividend, they yield about 2.6% right now, which is already pretty good, but the great thing is that it's likely to get even bigger in the future given the low payout ratio of less than 35%, the high growth rate of close to 20%, and almost a decade of consecutive growth to go along with it. Now, if you're someone who is predicting a recession to happen soon, then yeah, you may want to be careful with bank stocks right now, but so far JP Morgan has been on a tear with their stock climbing by over 120% in the past 5 years. But even still, they trade about the same as the sector median on a forward P basis, which is the reason why I continue to hold my stock, and I don't really plan on selling them anytime soon. That's because Chase is, in my opinion, a top tier stock in the sector and probably deserves to trade for a significant premium. When you look at their business, they already do over $100 billion in sales a year, but are still growing at healthy rates every year. Now, I will just mention that 2020 looks like a slowdown year for them, as their revenue is not expected to grow by much, and their EPS over the next 5 years is only expected to average around 6% a year. But I kind of like the fact that not a lot is expected from them in the short term, which may set them up to beat those reasonable estimates. In my opinion, I think analysts are lowballing JPM because we're so deep in our economic cycle that everyone keeps thinking we need to have a recession immediately, and all of the global weakness is causing more concern on top of that. But I'm not one who really fears a recession. I just see them as great buying opportunities to add to my stocks and kind of lower my cost basis and collect great dividends. So I'd rather have the low expectations for now, which, by the way, JPM is known for beating estimates pretty frequently. In all 3 quarters of 2019 so far, they beat EPS estimates by close to 10% or more. And keep in mind, guys, this is at a time when the Fed has actually been lowering rates, which is generally bad for banks. So if the economy continues to strengthen and a trade deal with China gets done, we might actually see rates start to climb again, and that could actually benefit JPM's business. Granted, consumer debt is really high right now, but given the really low unemployment rates coupled with high wages and high consumer confidence, it's very likely that we could continue to see an increase in loans and investments, which are two things that banks also rely very heavily on. And speaking about the trade war, as this article from the Washington Post points out, when talking about the winners and losers of the Phase 1 trade agreement, it's looking like a trade deal would finally allow US banks and credit card companies to enter China without having to partner with a domestic company, which would also benefit Visa, by the way. But according to Bloomberg, JP Morgan has already started working hard on entering the Chinese market, which they started earlier in the year in anticipation of this future trade deal so that they could have a head start on entering the Chinese market. So the way I see it, JP Morgan is known for being one of the best performing banks out there. In fact, other competitors like US Bank, Citigroup, Bank of America, or Wells Fargo are either seeing much smaller growth or even shrinking in the case of like Wells Fargo, for example. And if I'm going to own a long-term dividend bank stock, I'd rather go with a proven leader. I'm not saying that these other banks are bad. In fact, some of them actually look pretty attractive to me as well, but my favorite remains JP Morgan for the long term, and that dividend only makes it easier for me to hold. Anyway, that was stock number 2. Let's go ahead and transition now to stock number 3. And this one, in my opinion, is a leader in the kind of software and services, like technology, software, and services markets. And this is also my number 1 largest stock. I had to go with this one. One of my favorites. You guys know what it is. It is obviously Microsoft, ticker symbol MSFT. There's really no company out there, in my opinion, that has been more stable and more reliable than Microsoft. I really love this company. That's because they've done a great job of working their way into everyone's daily life, as they own the most used computer operating system in the entire world with Windows. They own the most widely used business and education software in the world with Microsoft Office. They own the largest professional networking site in LinkedIn. They own the equivalent for coders and programmers in GitHub. They have the second largest cloud platform in the world with Azure, which, by the way, is also growing faster than Amazon, and it'll also be used to fuel video game streaming with Project xCloud, which runs on one of the most popular gaming platforms in the world with Xbox Gaming, which, by the way, there's a new console generation launching later this year that I think also has a lot of potential and may actually sell as much as the PlayStation, given how many game studios Microsoft has acquired in order to build up their first-party games library, which shows that they're very dedicated to, kind of winning this next generation of consoles. And they're even using Azure to further advance the use of artificial intelligence, which I think Azure will play an even bigger facilitator role in AI than even Amazon, in a market that could be worth about $4 trillion by 2022, according to Gartner Research. And as big as Microsoft already is, many of their businesses are still growing at surprisingly large rates every quarter, with their last one seeing things like commercial cloud grow by 43%, LinkedIn by 28%, Azure by 72%, that's pretty crazy, gaming by 10%, and even Surface by 23%. And despite primarily being a tech-focused software company, Microsoft is pretty well diversified across all of these different markets, and that's led to very strong business performance with double-digit revenue growth in recent years, despite having already done a massive $125 billion in sales this past year alone. Meanwhile, projected EPS growth is also very high at nearly 15% a year over the next 5 years, despite them already being insanely profitable, doing over $41 billion of net income in the past 12 months alone. As a result, their stock rarely dips and has already climbed by close to 240% over the past 5 years to a new record high, while their forward PE has climbed to nearly 26, which is also pretty high for Microsoft. But the funny thing is that it's still technically lower than the sector median, and considering that they also pay a growing dividend that only yields about 1.3% right now, but carries a low payout ratio of less than 38%, a double-digit growth rate of over 12%, and 16 years of consecutive growth ever since they started paying it, and even through the Great Recession, not to mention what is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best balance sheets in the entire world, with nearly $140 billion of cash and equivalents that single-handedly covers all of their short and long-term debt combined, which will not only help them sustain their dividend, but also keep investing in their company and make even more strategic acquisitions in the future, like the great ones that they already made in LinkedIn and GitHub. I'd say that Microsoft is one heck of a dividend growth stock for the very long term. I will continue to hold it probably until I retire, and despite it already being my number one largest stock, I'm even willing to keep buying it on any dips well into the future. Okay, so that does it for my three kind of favorite dividend growth stocks as of right now. I know that they have pretty low yields, like I mentioned before, but that's why I chose another 5 bonus stocks with higher yields. Now, these ones, again, don't have a lot of growth potential in their dividends, but they have long track records of growing their dividends for many years. So that still makes them very attractive, especially for the higher yields that you get. And these are all kind of yields of around 3% or more. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into these. Right now, we'll do kind of a rapid fire. Okay, so if you care more about a higher yield, you may want to look at stocks like AT&T, ticker symbol T, which is set to be a huge player in the future of 5G with their telecom and internet business, and the future of video on demand streaming with HBO Max and their acquisition of Time Warner. Their dividend currently yields over 5%, which, by the way, I do actually own this stock myself, but my yield is over 7% because I bought them a long time ago when the stock was crashing, and a lot of people were calling me an idiot for buying them. But the other cool thing about AT&T is that their growth history is very high at 35 years of consecutive growth. The trade-off is the really low growth rate of just 2%, but since the yield is already very high, it may not be that big of a deal to some. Another one to consider might be 3M, ticker symbol MMM, the company behind Post-it notes, but they're also diversified into other areas like healthcare and industrial products, but because of global economic weakness, their business and their stock has been struggling a lot lately. But if they end up rebounding, their mouth-watering dividend could be a great pickup right now, as it yields over 3% with a double-digit growth rate and an absolutely massive 61 years of consecutive growth. And even with their business struggling, their payout ratio is still not that bad at just a little over 60%. So I don't expect it to get cut anytime soon. Not a stock that I own myself, but I honestly got really close to buying them a while back, and I may actually reconsider on any dip, as I think people are probably being a bit too overly bearish on this one. Now, there's also Caterpillar, ticker symbol is CAT, which is another stock that I do not currently own, but I actually talked about them in my 5 stocks that I really want to buy video because they're the world leader in construction manufacturing equipment with a really strong moat and brand. But because of global economic weakness, their business has been struggling lately, just like 3M, but I fully expect them to recover over the long term. In the meanwhile, though, their dividend is very attractive as it yields over 2.7%, has a pretty good payout ratio of less than 40%, and a very nice 26 years of consecutive growth. The trade-off, however, is that the growth rate is kind of low at less than 8% right now, so I'd rather wait for a dip before purchasing them, as they currently trade near their 52-week high, and I think it's a little overextended at this point considering all of the macroeconomic weakness. But just keep in mind that there are times where they actually increase that dividend by much higher rates, like for example, last year I think they increased it by 15%. So this is actually a pretty good dividend, I think, overall. Now, the next one here we have is PepsiCo, ticker symbol PEP, who is obviously famous for their soda drinks, but they're also pretty well diversified into juices, sports drinks, energy drinks. They have a partnership deal with Starbucks that, like a lot of people don't even know that. They also own healthier alternatives to sugar soda, like their brands of like SodaStream and Bubbly. And they also own snack brands like Doritos and Frito-Lay as well. I don't personally own the stock myself, but I probably will buy them on their next dip, as I really like their dividend that yields close to 3% with close to 50 years of consecutive growth to go along with it. That's very impressive. The trade-off is the single-digit growth rate and the higher payout ratio, but I still think that the dividend is very attractive overall, and it is a company that I'd rather own, like as opposed to like Coca-Cola, because they're a bit more diversified, at least in my opinion, because they also have like solid snacks and things like that. Anyway, finally here we have the last stock of the list, and this one has the lowest yield of the bonus stocks, but I wanted to include it anyway because they are the world leader in renewable energy from solar and wind, and that's really where I think the future of energy is headed along with hydro, and that's a company called NextEra Energy, ticker symbol and EE. Again, the yield is pretty low at just a little over 2%, but the payout ratio isn't too bad. They have a double-digit growth rate and close to 25 years of consecutive growth. So considering the future potential of renewable energy, this could ultimately turn into a pretty good dividend growth stock over the long term. Okay, so that just about does it for today's video. What did you guys think? Are any of these stocks on your watch list? Do you own any of these stocks? Are you considering any of these, or are all of these stocks that you're just not interested in? I would love to hear your thoughts down below. And if there's any dividend growth stocks that you would like me to talk about, make sure you list them down there as well. Hopefully there's some good companies out there with some good dividends. I'd love to hear about them, and maybe I'll include them in future videos. I definitely love talking about dividend growth stocks. It's one of my favorite kind of investing strategies out there. But anyway, that does it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit the like button. Thanks for all the support, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.